All right, hello
Perfect.
everybody, and welcome to our Teaching with Primary Sources webinar. We are so thrilled to have you join us. My name is Dr. Tina Ellsworth, and I'm an assistant professor of education at Northwest Missouri State University in Maryville. And joining us today is my assistant director of the Teaching with Primary Sources program, Dr. Scott Waring, who's a professor of social science education at the University of Central Florida in Orlando. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. The Teaching with Primary Sources program is funded by a grant from the Library of Congress's Teaching with Primary Sources program. And the content that's created and featured in partnership with the TPS program does not indicate an endorsement from the Library of Congress, but we are so grateful to have received support from the library to make these programs available. Our program actually runs from October 1, 2024 through September 30th, 2025 and features three two-day face-to-face workshops for PK through 16 educators. Our first one was in Maryville in December, and our second one was in Topeka, Kansas in January. Our last one is slated for the first week of April in Platte City, Missouri. Teachers who attend receive a stipend for their participation in the workshop, as well as for creating lessons that feature sources from the Library of Congress. And at our workshops, teachers learn a host of new ways to teach with primary sources in new and engaging ways. Our program also features 5 webinars with expert educators, and we have an incredible program lined up. And we also have a newsletter that you can subscribe to get the earliest information about upcoming events as well as tips for teaching with primary sources. And tonight is our first in our series, our first webinar in our series, featuring Dr. Ford from Northwest Missouri State University. But before we introduce her and turn the show over to her, we want to hear from you. So who are you and what drew you into our webinar tonight? If you are willing and able to unmute and talk to us, awesome. But if you want to drop it in the chat, we're good with that as well.
My apologies as I am eating dinner while listening. But hi, friends. I'm Amanda Purcell. I teach social studies in Lebanon in Southwest Missouri, and the department chair. So thank you for putting this
Excellent.
together.
Why did you decide to come to this webinar, Amanda?
Well, Tina, because I've done work with you before and you always do great things, and the Library of Congress has great stuff. So here I am as
I'm
I
glad to
anticipate
see.
maybe snow days this week.
I agree too. I think we are probably going to have some. Thank you so much, Amanda.
I'm Jay Bickford. I'm a professor at Eastern Illinois University, and I was just intrigued with the TPS LOC. They always do great work, and so do you, Tina. So I was excited to join. Yeah, and I
Thanks.
didn't know Scott was going to be on here. Nice to see you, Scott.
Yeah, good to see you as well. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Yeah.
Good to see you, Jay. Hi, Robert.
Sorry, I'm not very good at Zooming anymore.
I
We
know
were
we've
all
been out of
good at this.
practice for a bit.
Yeah, out of practice. I teach AP government and US government to 12th graders at a college preparatory school in Kansas City,
Which one are you at, Pembroke?
St. Teresa's Academy.
Okay, excellent. And so what drew you to this session?
Well, the calendar reminder, I had it on my calendar, and I think a peer in my department may have posted it to our Teams chat. I don't know, but the day she did, I looked at it and put it on my calendar, so I really don't remember now.
Excellent. Well, you are in for a treat. This is going to be fantastic. Okay. Well, we are really thrilled that all of you took time out of your night to join us. As I mentioned earlier, one aspect to our program is to offer webinars to help teachers learn more about teaching with primary sources. So tonight, we're pleased to present to you a brilliant historian who's done incredible work engaging with students in their own local histories. It was one reason why I was particularly drawn to her because I knew about the excellent things that she was doing up in Northwest Missouri and Nottoway County. Dr. Elyssa Ford is a professor of history at Northwest Missouri State. She's a scholar of sexuality in the American West and is a public historian. She has published 2 books on rodeo in the West, Rodeo as Refuge, Rodeo as Rebellion, Gender, Race, and Identity in the American Rodeo, was released by University Press of Kansas in 2020. And her second one, Slapping Leather, Queer Cowfolks as the Gay Rodeo, was published by the University of Washington Press in 2023. And as a public historian, she's committed to researching the community around her, and she's written extensively on local history topics and directs the Nottoway County Digital History Project. Tonight, Dr. Ford's webinar is entitled Teaching Through a Local Lens. It's in this webinar, she's going to work with us on exploring local histories. She's going to introduce us to online collections, including Family Search, Sanborn Maps, and Chronicling America at the Library of Congress. Teachers are going to have the opportunity to discover materials for your own communities and begin to think about how you can use these in your classroom. And if at any point you have a question to ask Dr. Ford, you can drop it in the chat. You also can unmute yourself and ask the question, and she's going to take them anytime you have them. So everyone, please help me welcome Dr. Ford.
Thank you so much, Tina. I really appreciate it. Let me go ahead and get my screen shared for y'all. And then since we're a pretty small group, though hopefully more people watch afterwards, because I understand that during a school night it is hard to get out and try to attend other things. But hopefully we'll go through a lot of sources that I hope maybe are new to you, and thinking about some different ways to use them. And then again, since we're a small group, instead of getting into breakout rooms, I think we'll be able to talk through some of the sources that I've got highlighted together, which should be fun because hopefully I've got fun ones identified. So as Tina said, I, in addition to my work on rodeo, I also do work on local history. I think that it's really important to know about and learn about the place where you are living. This started for me when I was in college. When I was in college, I was not even a history major or a history minor or a history anything, though I took a lot of African history classes. But my senior year last semester, I got to take one of my two total electives that were just classes I wanted to take for fun. And one of those two classes was women's history, but then the other one was the history of northern New England. So I went to school in Maine, and I'm from Texas. And when I went to college, I for sure thought that New England, as the colonies, was the entire East Coast and the entire 13 colonies, which is probably more a reflection of my history education leading up to that point. But it also meant I did not know anything about this place where I was going to college. And northern New England is literally just Maine, Vermont, and New Hampshire. And it was really fascinating to have the opportunity to actually get to learn about this place that I've been living for the last 4 years. Right before I graduated. When I moved to Missouri, I immediately got involved in doing research about this local community as well. And so I published a number of articles on this region. In addition to my own work, I bring local history into my classrooms. So in my public history classes, and so public history is history outside of academia, like museums and historic preservation and oral history. Of course, in those classes, we often are doing projects related to local history. I have classes that research, design, and install exhibits at our local museum. I've had multiple classes create tours, walking tours, and driving tours on different topics for about the community. I have students write now and then weekly columns for the newspaper. And that's in kind of my specialized upper division public history classes. But I also do this sporadically throughout my survey classes, my history survey classes. So during our discussion of slavery, I also like to talk about slavery in Northwest Missouri, because it's a space that has kind of a tricky situation with slavery because it was part of the Platte Purchase, not the original state of Missouri. So where does that fall in terms of the legality of slavery? We have documented that the Underground Railroad went right through here. We are also just on the border with Iowa, so a touching border with a free state, and have mapped out some really interesting things related to what's happening with slavery and freedom in a space like this. And so I think that helps students see slavery as something beyond just this broad abstract, but also like what it looks like here on this local level. When we talk about the women's suffrage movement, I like to talk about what was happening locally in Nottoway County because there was shockingly a lot. The picture on your screen is from a band in Nottoway County that participated in the 1913 Women's Suffrage Parade in DC. And then I hope to put this into context for both the larger region and from rural areas more broadly, because a lot of what we get about the suffrage movement is really an urban story. So when we started having COVID, I began to incorporate more disease in my classes. And so when we look at the yellow fever epidemics in the late 1790s, or 1918 influenza epidemic. I also have certain, especially in the 1918 one, I have certain parts of that assignment where they're reading about the outbreak more broadly, but then also looking specifically at Maryville to see what the response was here in our newspapers. And then I ask them to look at newspapers in their own hometown or near their hometown, because luckily through our university, we have access to not the full complete set, but a pretty good set of the materials on newspapers.com. And so it allows them to see a lot of those materials and then to see how those experiences line up or don't line up with the national presentation of the epidemic. So I've already done my introduction, but we'll talk about a little bit why local history, how to do local history, and looking specifically at some different types of sources, and specifically sources that are available in the Library of Congress. And then we'll have some discussions about some of these sources and then wrap up, and I can point y'all in a few directions for materials in case you want to learn more. So why local history? Since there are so few of us, do y'all want to jump in with like what you think might be some advantages of bringing local history into the classroom? I guess I already sort of said a few, but we can reiterate those, or if there's any additional ones you can think of.
Well, I think engagement is the main thing. I've had numerous students, in Kansas City, we have a history of redlining. It's no secret, and it's still very much a segregated city. So I see students come in using these words like, segregation and redlining, and I can tell that that's engaging to them.
Yeah. I think anytime you can show that it's not just the history out there existing in the ether, right? You can show what was actually happening in their communities, is really an important way for them to be able to engage in it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I do know a peer of mine at Rockhurst High School has created a Kansas City history class as a social studies elective that is very popular with the students there. So that's just anecdotal proof that if you bring local history, the students will engage with it.
Yeah.
I think it's a piggyback off of that, Robert, is that not only is it engaging about the past, but it helps them to answer questions about why things are the way they are today. Because people that drive around Kansas City might not see it quite as obvious. I don't know, I think it's painfully obvious, but people that live here, we know exactly where that street is that divides the populations by race. And for kids can see, I know that this is where Black people live. I know this is where white people live, but why is it that way? So it's like history, even then it's not in an ether, but it's also just not in the past. They're living the effects of those histories today, and it helps to answer the question, why are things the way that they are?
Well, and I think by knowing that too, it's not just helping like students engage more with that history or learn more about the present, but it also connects them more to their communities. And I think that's one of the really valuable aspects of history and of US history is that it's connecting us to this place where we live. And so you've got people who study local history that say that this is how to create a more knowledgeable citizenry, right, about this space. In addition to the points we already raised about it making it feel more tangible, more relevant. It also helps to complicate the bigger picture because the story that we're getting from the textbook, right, is the broader version of history. And so it's always good to like show history as this more complicated and complex element. And local history is the perfect way to do that because it's giving you some different examples, but it's the ones that hopefully your students are finding more interesting as well. It also means that often you've got primary source materials that are possibly more accessible to you than some other ones. Can any of y'all think of any difficulties in doing local history?
I'll jump in to say that, especially now living and teaching in a rural area, some of the time the sourcing of that is more complicated, right? There's fewer public historians writing about this town of 15,000 people than about redlining Kansas City, right? It's harder to get. I've also had, especially some colleagues have some really interesting moments when you find that kind of negative history of things around race and what have you, when it relates, like literally relates to the children in your classroom. And they're seeing, their ancestor as the person and not just some person in a faraway history book. And that I think that can be a really politically landmine filled space at times. So.
Yeah, Amanda, thank you. And first of all, yeah, your first point is perfect because even though I just said potentially sources can be more accessible because it's in your community, in fact, they often are difficult because you need to think about and know about where those sources can be. And they often are not digitized or easily accessible in the same way as just materials that have already been digitized at the Library of Congress. And your second point about controversial topics or more difficult history is exactly true. And it can feel a lot more contentious. I mean, obviously, we talk about difficult topics in our history classes, but it can feel a lot more contentious and a lot more sensitive when it is about your community, right? When it's descendants of those people may still be there, students are connected to those events. And so I think that means that you do need to think about what you are going to talk about. It doesn't mean you can't have or approach any of those difficult conversations, but you need to anticipate like what you're going to do and what kinds of questions students may have related to that. One other element that comes up a lot about local history is it's really easy to get caught up in the minutia of local history. So does the local reflect and support the national story, or is it something different? You don't want to just tell like this really fascinating story about something local and then not do anything with it or not have a purpose for what that material is doing and why it is present for you in the classroom. So always thinking about how it is connecting back to and supporting those teaching standards. And again, either supporting or showing a different element of that kind of larger national story that your textbook is telling. Okay, so how to do it? Researching your local history. What sources are available at the Library of Congress? So I'm going to highlight a few, kind of 2 to 3 main areas, and we're going like within those dive into some different areas. So the Library of Congress has an a huge amount of research guides. And what you can see on the screen are just some of the broad categories of research guides. But if you were to click on any of those categories, you'd see all of the actual research guides that are within that. So first of all, if this is something you haven't seen before or used before, it's a really fantastic resource for any of your history or political science classes if you are looking for materials about a topic. In terms of local history, the place that's going to have that information is under genealogy. And it doesn't mean that this is all related to genealogy, but genealogy records are, in fact, a great place to find our local history materials. So when you look at these genealogy sources, it's got just about everything. So it's got a lot of kind of identities of people, ethnicities of people. It's got a lot of countries. On the far right, though, you can see, and this is just little bits of snippets of the like alphabetical areas. It also has one for every single state. And so this is a really great place to start by going to your state to see what kinds of things are available there. Since I'm in Missouri, and a number of y'all are in Missouri, that's what I am focusing on today. So this is what the Missouri guide looks like. And in fact, when you're inside of it, it actually says Missouri local history and genealogy, even though local history is not mentioned outside of this in the research guides as any kind of research guide or category. So within this, all of the states have these three broad categories here, which you can see over on this left-hand side: vital records, courthouse records, and digital collections. We're going to focus on some within both vital records and courthouse records. Because we're not going to focus on the digital collections, I just went ahead and listed out all of the different subcategories that this research guide includes. And these are the ones that will tend to appear in the research guides for every state. Now, just as a note about those digital collections, that's all pulled from the Library of Congress's own materials. And so it doesn't mean sometimes there's a lot of materials that are there, and sometimes there's very little material that's there. So under personal papers for Missouri, there are only personal papers for one family that are listed, and that is someone who was the Speaker of the House, the U.S. Speaker of the House in the 1910s, who was from Missouri. And I did not go back to look at them to see if any of them are actually available digitally. Some of them might be, but some of them may only be accessible on site. Though some should be digital since they are listed as digital collections. Okay. So let's go ahead and look at the vital records. Again, I just did a snippet of the first part of this, so it's not limited to adoption, birth records, and death records. This is just the beginning of that alphabetical series. What you also will notice here is that under these vital records, they're generally linking you out to other sites and other sources. So they're not necessarily all materials that are on the Library of Congress, though the Library of Congress is kind of collating them into one space and directing you towards them. Also, what is available by state can vary really dramatically. So if you've ever done any genealogy work, you know this. But if you have not, it can vary really dramatically. Within the state of Missouri, we are really lucky because our death records have been digitized for a really long period of time. And so I want us to focus a little bit in on these death records. So if I were to click on this state level 1910 well, actually, the way they present this is a little strange. I think they might have a typo here. So the state level pre-1910 to 1970, that's incorrect. It is, in fact, 1910 to 1970. And this is done through the Missouri State Archives. I'm not sure what the difference is here. But if we click on this, this is the site that our death records look like. So the Missouri State Archives is housed under the Missouri Secretary of State's office. And so that's why when you're in there, it has like, why does this seem like a promotion for our Missouri Secretary of State? This is why, because that's the home. So these are available from 1910 to 1973, though these that category, the availability can expand every year as items are digitized and as the length of time after records have passed, they're able to allow more to be publicly available instead of just to immediate family members. So what you see on the screen here is the search function. So you can search by deceased, spouse, mother, and father, which already is telling you there's some pretty cool information that's available on these death records because you can search by people who aren't just the person who died. And then you can see here the sample search that I have done for y'all. I went ahead and did last name starts with A. I went ahead and selected 1910 to 1911, and then a county. You can actually do this search with literally nothing in there. Some systems don't let you do that. This one does. But you can, what's nice is you can search by county. The key thing here on the county, though, it is the county where the individual died. It is not really, it's not going to necessarily be the county where they are buried. So people can be buried here in Nottoway County, but if they died across the border in Iowa, I am going to be unable to find a death record for them, since that's not going to be a Nottoway County, state of Missouri death record. Okay. So this is what the results, or have any of y'all done like death record searches like this in Missouri before? A few people. Okay, Robert has. Tina hasn't. Okay, death records are so fun, I think. So here is an example of what this looks like. So it's just going through this alphabetically. On this page, you can see date of death, county, and that's really it. So if you are looking for a specific person, or if you're looking for like a specific age of person or a specific type of death, you really have to do some hunting in advance for what you're wanting to download and use in your classroom, because it's not going to reveal much from the search results. Okay. So since there's not very many of us, we'll just do this together and you don't need to take a screenshot of the next two slides. We'll just talk about them together. So here is a sample death record. And so let's work through this together. So do y'all just want to unmute yourselves? And then, so so you can see up at the top left corner where, oh gosh, well, I don't know if it'll let me get up there. Well, I touched it and it won't let me show it anymore. Okay, well, let's look at this one. Sorry, I went to record number 2. You can kind of see Nottoway Township that's up there. Can you tell where this person or find where this person is buried?
The bottom right, place of burial. Does it say or removal? My monitor is so tiny. Lamar Cemetery? Or
Was it really tiny for y'all?
probably just for me.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm trying
Yeah,
to
so
find the
it's,
artifact so I can look at it on my bigger monitor, but
oh, and if you want to look it up on your own, her name, we'll figure out her name first and then y'all can go and find her. So this is us like practicing our old-timey cursive, which is, I'm sure you know, if you've had students recently look at primary source documents, this
is
is
that
the struggle
Adkins?
of us no longer teaching cursive.
Adkins?
Yep, Adkins. So it's Molly Molina, I think, Adkins. And she's just on the first page of that A 1910 to 1911 Nottoway County.
So
Okay.
if I could ask a question about this, because I am very curious. In the chat, I've been trying to keep up with the links as you go and providing them there so that everybody can look at it. If you click on that one that's the most recent and it says death records, when I'm on that page on the Secretary of State's website, on the bottom right, it says death record search, and I go to Nottoway County and I type in the name and it's not showing up.
So you want to make sure you're going, are you at that, if you're on the screen, you're going to that Missouri State Archives link,
I
not
did.
the Missouri Department of Health.
Yes, correct.
Oh, well, if that link's not working, then just type in,
It is. I can't get to this screen.
so just try going to Google and search Missouri State Archives death records.
I'm on the right page, but her name's not showing up.
Oh, you mean you're getting to this page or not this page?
Well, I didn't get to this search page, but now I see like the list. George Abel, William Adams, Adcock, Atkins, but it's a Howard Houston. And then that's it. Yeah, I can't find that one. So collections
So
and death
here.
certificates.
Missouri. So here I will put in the chat, if I can find the chat. So here is the link.
Okay.
And then that should take you directly to
It does.
this page. And that was just me going into Google and searching Missouri State Archives death records.
Okay, interesting.
Okay. So how old, if we go back to this Molly Adkins, can y'all tell how old she was when she died? It's one of the easiest to do because it's just numbers, right? So, and sad, this person was 6 months, 14 days. And so the other things that you can see on these death records that are really interesting is they tell us sex, they tell us race, they tell us their marital status, their birthplace, and here it gets really specific, the township within Nottoway County. And then it also gives the name of the mother and the father and the birthplace of the mother and father. So you can, and it gives you occupation. Of course, a 6-month-old does not work, but it gives you occupation. And so you can gain a lot of really interesting information about an individual from these death records. If now the part that is the most complicated, I think, and often for students, is the cause of death. So what was the cause of death of this individual?
Does it say pneumonia?
It says pneumonia. What do we think about the second word? So it starts with an L.
Lobar?
It's either R, I think it's R.
S?
It could possibly be S. And so, and since I'm not a disease expert, what I do is then take it to Google to type it in and see what Google spits out at me. And that tells me which letter it is. And then that can also tell you what that disease is. Part of the reason I think that these are so interesting is that the way that they are described, that we describe diseases, right, and understand disease in different time periods has not been the same. And so often, I mean, pneumonia is still a disease that we know, but often you'll see diseases here or causes of death listed that are very different than the way that like we think about them or would identify them today. Okay, so let's go ahead and look, and then it also tells you how long they had that disease, if known. So this baby was sick for 15 days. Okay, let's go to.
I'm sorry. I was
Oh,
just
go
gonna say,
ahead.
I've seen consumption a number of times in old records like this, which I think is tuberculosis, maybe?
Yep, tuberculosis. So let's go to this next one because I can't remember. Oh, yeah, this is a good one. Okay. So who is our person who has died this time? So he's a lot easier to read, right? Samuel Arnold. Yep. You can also see where they died. So this person died at the hospital, St. Francis Hospital, which is the hospital in Maryville. I was looking at one from around the same time period in Kansas City, and the person they might have died at a hospital, I guess, but it was an injury at a water park in the middle of a park in Kansas City, and she'd gotten mangled in the mechanism of a machine. So you can see some kind of interesting, like, locations as well. So this person was 67 years old. They were a police judge. And then what did they die of?
Is that an
That's-
apoplexy?
Yeah. So it's apoplexy. So that's like not really something we say that people die of anymore. So what is apoplexy? And this is where you just go to Google.
Yep.
Thank goodness for Google.
Oh, a stroke or cerebral
stroke.
hemorrhage.
Yeah. And so you'll see a lot, like a stroke. It very rarely in this early period does not appear as stroke, but you can see cerebral hemorrhage. You might see hemorrhage of the brain. You see apoplexy a lot. Sometimes you'll see it called just like a paralysis on like one side. So you see a lot of different versions of things. For both of the ones that I selected, there's nothing listed under contributory, but there often can be something that's listed down there as well. That like, what was the person I just saw? I think I don't know, died of like diarrhea or something that I was looking at today. And then secondary was like rheumatism. And so you've got sometimes they go together and sometimes it's just here's this underlying cause. So how could you envision using death records like this in the classroom?
I think about to learn maybe what were some common ailments. Like especially when I was doing a little bit of research on the 1918 influenza, I'd be curious to see how maybe that was characterized or how many actually said that. Or if there were obviously diseases that maybe perhaps have been eradicated since 100 years ago, but also learning you were talking about genealogical research, connecting people together by seeing who was a parent or a child to someone.
Yeah, death records can be if you wanted someone to engage and like kind of learn how to do some genealogical research, it can be a good place to start. Well, if you provide this to them, otherwise it's a weird place to start. But a good place to start because it provides you so much additional information about family members, names, date of birth, and location of birth of parents that it gives you a lot to then take into a search engine like Family Search, to see what other records you can find about that individual and their family. Yeah. One of the things that surprises a lot of my college students when they look at these is how many young people there are, and what young people and middle-aged people are dying of, because that's really dramatically different from what they are familiar with. Um, it could take a fair amount of work, but it could also be interesting, especially if you're in a smaller community, to be able to like line up any of the occupations and the types of things that people in those occupations are dying of. I could sort of see kind of an interesting kind of visual that could be created out of a whole series of these death records. One of the other things that can be done, it depends on what you have available to you. But so like, for instance, since we've got access to newspapers.com and all of the Maryville papers have been digitized and are available to our students on that site. If there's anyone who died or was buried in Maryville, specifically in Nottoway County, we are then able to go from this death record to look up in the newspaper and to see if we can find an obituary or anything else about them, about their death or when they were alive. So you could also choose a location specifically that is from a newspaper that's available on Chronicling America on the Library of Congress or some other state digitized state history, state newspaper projects to do some of that same kind of thing, even if you're not necessarily able to do it for your own community, if you don't have access to that paper archivally. Okay. Any other questions about death records or things that you want to explore related to them? So we'll go ahead and move into some of the courthouse records. You'll note, and this is back at that state of Missouri stuff on the Library of Congress. So under the courthouse records, you'll notice that also many of the vital records are listed there as well, because of course those are like adoption, birth, death. Those are legal records as well. But within here, I want us to look at a little bit related to the criminal court. Again, like the vital records, what is digitally available to you in a specific state varies really dramatically by state. In the state of Missouri, again, we are really lucky that so many of our court records have been digitized. That is possible because the Missouri State Archives has a whole series of people who are local record specialists, and they are not located in Jeff City. They are actually located across the state and have a certain number of counties that they're responsible for. And their entire job is digitizing courthouse records. And so that's why we have this stuff that is available, that a lot of states don't have that same kind of organization that's happening within their state archives. Okay. So the Missouri State Archives, again, is where we have our judicial records that are available. To search here, you can do party name, you can search by year, you can also do cause of action or subject county. And then down below this, I didn't include it in my visual, but you can also do a specific keyword search. Again, like the death records, you can search any county within the state, but you cannot just do a county search, I don't think. This one's a little wonky, like you got to put a couple things in if I'm remembering correctly. But under the cause of action or subject, like as you can see on the screen, there's kind of everything. Abortion, annulment, arson, bribery. I'm very curious about like what the rules were for breaking Sabbath in the early days of Nottoway County. I'm incredibly curious about teacher, like what are these teacher cases that are going to criminal court? So there is a ton of like really cool stuff to explore there, first of all. So I had gone in to do this because I had students that had developed an exhibit and a website about slavery in Nottoway County. And I wanted to go in and see if there were what kind of court cases there had been in Nottoway County related to slavery or had involved enslaved people. And then I found several and linked those to our website. So based on my search for slave and Nottoway County, it came up with 12 results. Unlike the death records, these search results are a lot more detailed. So you can like scroll through all of them and decide if this is actually something you're wanting to click on before you dive in a little bit more. So it gives the names of all of the people who were involved. It gives a summary of the case. And so even just having students look through something like this is really interesting to see, like, how are people identified, right? Like, what is their legal identity? Because the legal identity of someone who is enslaved is just their first name and then a slave. And then thinking about how women are like non-enslaved women, how non-enslaved men are identified. And then what kinds of cases are there involving slavery? Some of these you might, depending on the age of your students and what is allowable in your school district, you may want to look at some of these ahead of time because as you can see from the second case here, it is a pretty awful court case. The one that is certainly revealing to the reality of the experience of many enslaved women. When you go in and click on view record detail, it actually doesn't give you a whole lot more information. So it gives you kind of the same information, except, and then like one additional sentence. However, you can click on the view image that's available here. And when you view image, it's actually view a whole lot more than one image, because what it takes you to is the fully digitized case. And so this court case is 41 pages long, though it hurts my brain to even look at this first page because I can't read any of those words, maybe about 4 of them. And so these are going to be much more difficult to actually go through the originals of than perhaps something like the death records. So for the court records, there's some really incredible material there, but a lot of it, especially from the older cases, you may be using more this kind of record detail that's here as opposed to diving into 41 pages of court recorder's handwriting. Okay.
That's really fascinating. And they don't all have that. I'm noticing that some of the records don't have these images, but the ones that do, wow.
Yeah, and sometimes they're only fully digitizing the ones that are like the hot topic cases, the ones that like people, they think people might be the most interested in. And then otherwise, you're just going to get that typed up information. Like you're only going to get this page with that kind of detail as opposed to the full documentation itself. What can also be really interesting about these is to have students look at what kind of cases are happening in different periods of time, because they can change pretty dramatically. And court cases also reveal a lot about society. So when you're in the Prohibition era and you've got a lot more cases about alcohol, or if you're in the 1870s and you have a lot more cases about bankruptcy or gambling, right? Like you've got things that can tell you about an economic depression. You've got things that can tell you about laws and what society, or the laws that society was concerned about enforcing at a time period. Yeah. Do y'all have any other questions or comments about records like these criminal court cases? They can also just be really fun to see what people got in trouble for, because we've got some like there's a sketchy guy back in the 1880s. And so I looked to see, and the word was like always like he was a bad dude, which he was. And I went and looked him up, and it's like he was in court so many times, and he was like suing people who owed him a nickel. And then he was getting taken to court for gambling a nickel. Like he like wasn't even big stuff. He was just up to everything bad and low money. So, okay. Jay, had you had a thought there? I couldn't tell if you were leaning towards unmuting yourself or not.
Oh, I'm just looking closely. Yeah, I'm intrigued. Keep going. Thank
Okay.
you. You're doing wonderfully.
I did find one in my county that's in 1869, where the defendant was accused of disturbing school by using loud and indecent conversation. And the state of Missouri is the plaintiff. And it has an image with it.
Was that for searching the subject of teacher?
School.
Oh, school. Okay.
Yeah.
I really have to go search teacher after this in Nottoway County.
I did search teacher in my county, and there was nothing there. So then I searched school, and that's when I found this one. But I'm curious how old this was. It a student that did it? Was it a teacher that did it? Or was it a parent? Who's disturbing the school? I'm very curious.
Yeah. And that's when you've got to take it to the newspapers, because the newspapers reported on everything. If you were like Maryville and there were 3 newspapers and they all published basically every day, if you breathed, they were going to report on it. So that's
great corroboration practice too.
Yes. Okay. so let's move forward. So we've looked at those like research guides and what's available at the Library of Congress under the research guide for a state. You can also go to the Library of Congress, which I'm sure we have all done, and do just a generic search. So if you were trying to find something about a specific community, you can try searching. I would recommend searching in a variety of very specific ways. So what I've done here is I just searched Nottoway County in quotes. However, there's a lot of counties. Jackson County, that's a really popular county name. So you want to try Jackson County in quotes plus Missouri. You could try Jackson County in quotes. Then you might want to try just MO. So you could try the full state, try the abbreviation of the state. You can do the county. You can also do a town because some things and maybe in here for just the city of Maryville that are not going to be also have like the keyword identification of Nottoway County. And so you might want to try to do both of those in combination with or without a state that's there. Okay, so I did this for just Nottoway County, and you can see, holy smokes, how is Nottoway County, Missouri in the Library of Congress? 4,426 times. Oh my God, you've never been so excited. And then you look a little more closely and you go, oh, actually, 4,327 of those are newspapers. And those newspapers are not necessarily going to be newspapers that are even from Nottoway County, but newspapers that just mention Nottoway County. And so if you end up with search results like this, you may want to try to exclude said category of newspapers to focus on the material that is actually going to be the digitized material about the place that you are looking for. Okay. So this is the type of stuff that appears when I did Nottoway County. We've got our Sanborn maps, which we'll talk about, an index to a newspaper of a small town, a couple of photographs. We've got a couple different like history of Nottoway County books, the slave narratives, because there is a WPA slave narrative with a woman who was enslaved and then continued to live in Nottoway County, and a few other kind of pieces of information. So we're going to click and look at this history of Nottoway County book. So this is from 1882. We've got a copy of it in our library on campus. We've got a copy of it at the museum here in town, but amazingly, it's also at the Library of Congress and fully digitized. This entire book is fully available. And so when you look at it, because old-timey books about local history, they love to get into the minutia, which is both a plus and a minus. But if you look at this, there are tons of materials in here or kind of topics that students could read about to prepare projects related to agriculture or like look at just our religious denominations. We've got the very specific origin of every single church and every person who was a preacher there, probably every person who attended that church by 1882. Education and schools. You've got a whole section on newspapers. You've got like tons of really interesting and rich topics that are available for students. If you click within, like you're in here looking at the document, you can just scroll through here each page. I do not know how well their system will hold up to like 30 students being in there at the same time. So if there's one you want to specifically use for class, when you go down to the download function, many of these have a PDF as an option, a couple of different JPEG sizes, and a TIFF file. What you probably would want to use for a classroom and to make it accessible to your students would be the PDF or the JPEG. The JPEG, of course, for a PowerPoint or a PDF, well, either one, if you're maybe wanting to print it. The TIFF file is something you generally would not need to download. That's the very, very high resolution file format that is really generally there for people who are going to be submitting it for publication as an image as a part of a book or a journal article. So I do want to focus, the next area I want us to look at are these Sanborn maps. Have any of y'all used the Sanborn maps before? Oh my God, Sanborn maps. are amazing. So this is the Sanborn Fire Insurance Company, which tells you kind of in a sense everything you need to know about what they were interested in was, are these buildings going to burn down and am I going to have to pay for them? Okay, so this is a fire insurance company. So they are interested in what the buildings are made out of and what potential fire hazards are there. So when we look in at some snippets of Sanborn maps, the yellow are buildings that are made out of wood. The pink are buildings that are made out of brick. You can also see that, like, so for instance, in the center one, you've got kettle highlighted, heater highlighted. You've got a kiln, but it says very specifically kiln that's not used. So they're identifying things that may like are where like fire and heat is used. And then they also identify in green items that they really want to kind of draw like their own attention to as like combustible possibilities, or where hot work is being done. So a tin shop, oils, paints. So this may not be like what the store actually is, but it's like, hey, within this entity, like, yikes, there's some scary stuff going on with potential fires. It also means that you might see notes like this. Horses kept at Hunt's Livery, one hose cart. And so they're telling you about, and like you also see other things that might say like one night watchman does round every 2 hours. So is someone going to notice a fire? Is there anything in that building that's going to help in response to a fire? So sometimes there's these random little tidbits of extra information that are just strange to see on a map of a town because it's not a map of a town, right? It's a map of a town for a fire insurance company. What's really amazing about these is that they tell you what all of the businesses are. So they do not give you the name of the business, but it gives you the type of business. It doesn't do the same for houses. For houses, it just says dwellings. So you cannot use these to identify where people lived unless you already know where they lived. But otherwise, it tells you what the businesses were. So if we look at this one right here on the right, let's try to just like go down our list and see if we can figure out what each of these businesses are. So what's our one at the top? So we're looking at our right pink buildings.
Oh, the hose wagon? Like
We've got our hose wagon and hose cart, which is strange.
it makes me wonder if it's like a fire station.
It must be something like that. And then what's next to it?
Like
Over here.
variety. Like a general
just-
store, maybe?
Yeah, just like so generally the general stores will say that, but yeah, kind of
Okay.
a variety store. What about the one below it? What letters do you think you see there?
Looks like CLO.
CLO, that is correct.
Maybe clothing?
Clothing. Okay, clothing. This one and this one are the same.
Is it sad or bad?
It's SAL.
Oh.
L is a little tricky because it kind of looks like they've got a T on there, but I think it's SAL. So what could SAL be in a downtown?
Saloon.
Oh my God, this town is up
Yeah.
to no good. This one is, I think this is somewhere in Indiana, and yikes, y'all. They've got 2 saloons, and then we've got, what's this one? We've clearly got stoves here, right?
Oh, I thought that was stores. Okay.
That one's
So
that one's stoves, I think.
I can't make out those letters very well.
Might be stores. Yeah, for this copy has like some strange little like horizontal lines going across. So this is hardware. Hardw. Hardware.
Okay.
We've got saloon. What about this one?
Restroom?
Restaurant,
Restaurant.
which is going to be
Restaurant.
very unusual. I guarantee that's probably the only restaurant on this square. Down below it,
Drugstore.
drugstore,
Groceries?
groceries. This one's got a square in the middle of it.
I have no idea.
What do you think it starts with? What letter?
I don't know if it's a P or maybe an F.
It's an F. So we've got FU. So we've got FURNG. So that's going to be furnishings.
Oh.
Yeah. And so after you've looked at some of them, you'll understand what they're saying because they all tend to use the same kind of abbreviations. And every now and then there's like one where I'm like, I like have no idea. But if you just type that in and go like, what's this in Sanborn Maps? It'll tell you. Because there is kind of this massive key for everything. But a lot of them are just, it's really fun to go to use with students to have them kind of just try to figure it out the way that we did. Okay, so even though the Sanborn maps are all available on the Library of Congress, however, I do not think the Library of Congress is actually the best way to access them because if I'm searching Nottoway County, it's going to give me all of them like individually for all of Nottoway County. And when I say individually, I don't even mean by year. I just mean like this map, part one, this, it's a mess. So the Sanborn maps are generally also available through like a state historical society or a university within a state. So as you can see on the screen, Mizzou has all of the ones for Missouri, University of Texas has the ones for Texas. This is when you search for them at the University of Missouri. Well, not when this is just the home for them. And you can see that it's got every single town. And so I really like this because you can go through and see all of the towns. And then when you click on a town, it will show you all of the ones for that town organized by year. And so if we click on Missouri, Maryville, we've got we've got 4 years that are available. And these generally are available from like the 1880s through maybe 1920. But it doesn't guarantee that they are all available for that entire time for the town that you were looking for. But they are available for like really small towns. Okay. So why do you think there would be, and so when we're looking at, sorry, let me go back. When we're looking at this map, so the map is broken up into like these 2 pages. So 1886, you've got this part of the map and this part of the map, right? In the same way that you're looking through an atlas and Texas is on like 4 pages of an atlas. So why do you think in 1886 we've got 2 pages, 1891 we've got 4 pages, 1900 we've got 6 pages, and 1909 we've got 9 pages?
City's growing.
The city's growing, right? And you can see that reflected very clearly here with how much the map is growing. Okay, so
Do you
what
know
it
why a
means,
city might not be included?
I don't know.
Okay.
So when you're looking at these are all of the maps for Maryville in 1909. The very first page always includes a key. And so if you see right here, this is the key. Every single one of these, the colors don't mean anything on that key. All that is to show different pages of the map. All of those have a number on them, and the number corresponds with the number that's out here. So like this pink one right here might be number 2, then that's going to be this map. That might be number 3, that's going to be this map. So if you already know what part of town you're interested in, you don't necessarily have to click through every single map to find that space. You can look on here and say, oh, I know it's this kind of area that I'm interested in and definitely not down here. It's also generally really easy to identify the downtown of an area because downtown is often brick. And so the pink buildings are showing you where downtown is. So right here in the middle is the courthouse. We can see one side of downtown. This is showing us another side, and this is showing us the bottom and another side of here as well. So if I'm just really interested in having students look at, like, well, what are the businesses that existed in this town in certain periods? I know that I only really need to look at those 3 sections of the map, and I don't really care about the rest of them. The houses are almost always going to be the yellow buildings. Of course, sometimes there's houses that are not just in yellow. But there are also other businesses that can appear in yellow as well. A lot of churches will appear that way and will also be sprinkled throughout town as opposed to just in the downtown area. For the churches, it does say what type of church it is. So, and like if it's First Baptist, it'll usually say First Baptist. So you can kind of map out and identify like religion within a community as well. And then all of these that have that the hard boundary around them, those are areas that are like outside of town a bit, that they're not mapping the entire area. So just that's like a Hawaii and Alaska on our US maps. And then when you look in there, you can kind of see it on this one. There's like a little bit of an arrow. And so it'll be like downtown, 2 miles that way. And so it'll kind of give you a sense of where it is. So if we look in more closely, I know this is blurry, but here you can see like that key that has the numbers. And then on the maps themselves, in addition to like it showing up when you click, that number shows up here too. And then on the maps, it gives all of the cross streets. And then you can zoom in and see everything in really great detail. I will say, I don't know about the Library of Congress. I will say the Mizzou site cannot handle 20 students at one time looking at these maps. It cannot take it. And so when I'm having students look at these, I download them in advance and put them together in like a Word document for them to be able to look at. It can also be really difficult to kind of orient yourself on these maps. So one thing that you might want to do for a class that would be new with it is actually yourself get several of the separate maps and then cut out, like snip the portions of downtown, and then on your Word document, create all of downtown there, because otherwise it appears on like 4 different maps in these little pieces, and it's really hard to kind of get this sense of what that looks like and how it fits together. I've also put together a series of these maps from like different years, and then my classes walked from our classroom to downtown, and then done a walking tour of downtown, where then like you have got to like turn that map, like if I'm walking up this street, like I need to turn my map this way because that is, it seems obvious, but a lot of times you're not going to do it when you're walking, and then that helps you figure it out. And it can be a lot of fun when you're walking along the street to look at it and say like, okay, this is the coffee, Bearcat coffee shop. Like what was this in 1886? What was it in 1909? Was it the same thing in those periods? Did it change over time? What kinds of businesses were there downtown? And they're always surprised at like how many clothing stores and how many drug stores and how few restaurants there were in these communities. So we will not look at this because we already went ahead and did that. But this will just give you a sense of the same map, one on the left from 1909 and one on the right from 1886 in Maryville. And you can see how things were changing or how things were staying the same. So here you can see that we've got a book and jewelry store, a dry goods store, and a hardware store, and a drugstore that were all the same, but almost everything else, other than our very odd combination of a bank and a barbershop, which was apparently a very common combination in Maryville, everything else has pretty much changed on this map. Okay. So a couple of other things I'll just draw your attention to quickly. through the Library of Congress, there's the Chronicling America, which is the digitized historic newspapers. And so these are available from 1756 to 1963. And it's a really good free source to be able to access digitized newspapers, particularly back in the colonial and early American period. In addition, and I will say that newspapers.com is by far the best, but that is a paid subscription. So Chronicling America, great for a free site. In addition to that, there are a lot of other places where you can access digitized newspapers that are not available on Chronicling America. And some of these are also not available on newspapers.com. And so this is a research guide that I put together with our library. Anyone is able to access this research guide, though some of the materials on it you will not have access for because it's paid databases that we have. But this section here about state newspaper collections, anyone can access. What I've included are just links to several of them, but I guarantee they exist for every state. And if you just type in digitized newspapers, whatever state you're interested in, you will find what the main site where those are. It's going to be either through your state historical society or a flagship institution in that state. Though sometimes in states there are multiple houses for these. So in Texas, this like digital portal is the main one, but I couldn't find my town's newspaper there. And so I just typed in like Eastland, Texas, digitized newspaper. And this portal is available through the University of North Texas, but the University of Texas also has some other digitized newspapers, and I found my hometown's newspaper that way. So you can try just doing an array of Google searches to see what you might be able to find there for either the newspaper for the town you're wanting to teach about or a town in the community, because you never know what might be available. And then I also will briefly mention Family Search. I'm sure Ancestry we've all heard of, but Family Search is powered by Ancestry and is the free version of Ancestry. And so Family Search is fantastic. You can access almost the same amount of materials there, not entirely, but like all of the census records are there. All of the slave schedules are there. There is a wealth of materials that you can get to through Family Search. I wouldn't necessarily have, since y'all have kind of high school and middle school students, having them create accounts. At the university level, I do have my students create free accounts, and we'll use these for a lot of different projects. But otherwise, you can go in an account you create and then download things like the slave schedules for your town to then have the students look at those. And there can be some really cool extensions on what is possible to be done based on something like this, because these slave schedules, if you've ever looked at them, are incredible, but they only list the name of the slave owner and then the number of slaves and their ages and their gender, nothing else about them. So I had a student at one point who used all of the slave schedules in 1850 and 1860, took the names of the people who appeared there to our courthouse, and got the land records, the land ownership records for all of those individuals, and then platted out in a map of Nottoway County where those people lived, which then tells us where many of those enslaved people lived, though not necessarily all of them. And I think this is a really powerful map that I use every semester in my survey classes, because this is Nottoway County, this is Iowa. And so you've got enslaved people who are living literally on that line of freedom, right? And if that's a space where you are, you can say that, but then being able to see that and then be able to use like digitized newspapers to look up the like runaway slave posses that they're gathering up in town, like that hits really differently. Okay. If you want to learn more about some of this, on the left, The Nearby History by Kaivig and Marty is a really great book. It talks a lot about different sources, and then it just asks questions. Like there will just be like pages of like questions in like what you can ask about local history, how you can interrogate different types of sources. And it's really nice and really useful to look at. And then the book on the right is a pretty newly published book. Bringing School to Life, Place-Based Education. This book, I would say, is at minimum 50% not about history education, but for science classrooms and how to use your local environment and your local region as a way to teach science. So, and it's got things that are at the elementary school level and then a little bit at the middle school level. So that's some information there. And then if you've got any questions, please feel free to send me an email and I will be sending Tina the PowerPoint. And so she can share that out with y'all if you would like to have it. Do you have any questions for me? Or which of these documents are you most excited to go and explore for where you live? And fingers crossed they exist in Illinois and
Florida.
Florida, because I don't know what y'all have.
The
I know
Sanborn
Kansas.
maps.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the Sanborn maps are so cool.
I kind of got distracted a little bit on the map that I pulled up of the city where I live, because our downtown area is pretty bustling with mom and pop shops. And so when I was looking at it, I see several things that are marked dwelling, and then every once in a while it'll say Negro dwelling. So, but they're not segregated.
Yeah.
And so I'm very drawn to the fact that, number one, that they labeled it separately, but that they are in and among all of the dwellings. So for being a county that had enslaved people, and this map was like the earliest one that I saw, when was this? 1886. And it does not appear to be segregated downtown. It's very fascinating to me. Curious how that got there. But I think also some of the street names have changed, which has always been something that's really intrigued me, is when street names change. There's in Lawrence, Kansas, there's several streets that are named after the states in the order that they were admitted into the Union. As you drive in from the east and go west, you're seeing the states, and one of the states is missing. So I've been very curious for a while. Where's Virginia Street? And so this could be a good place where I could go and see, was there ever a Virginia Street? Where was it? Was it renamed? Was it built on top of? So this could help me finally find the answer to that stinking question about where's Virginia Street. But that's fascinating.
And Jay and Amanda, y'all said y'all were excited about the Sanborn maps.
Yeah, very much so. There's a lot of neat things you can do with that, and have the kids decipher it, and with Google as a backup. Yeah.
Yep. And it's really hard if then the buildings have changed. Oh, like in Maryville, it's pretty much the same set. Oh, I can see that. And then on one side of the square, it's like, I don't know. They've turned all of this into one building and it gets really complicated. And it is more difficult when you're doing it in Google Street View as opposed to being there in person. But Google Street View is a really great thing to pair with it if you cannot go in person to see it with the class. Sorry, Amanda, what were you saying?
Oh, no, you're great. I just think it'd be also interesting to have kids explore that idea of change over time, because with those maps, you've got the same basic thing, historically and several times, as well as then either the in-person or Google Street View, to a whole big jump to today. I think that could really help that timelining process with kids.
Yeah.
Although I am finding that some of these maps are featuring different parts of the city at different times. So it's not like they're necessarily repeating the same area of town, and that's interesting.
Yeah, and they don't necessarily include like all of the dwellings. My sense of them, and like, don't quote me on this, even though this is going on YouTube, my sense is that at a certain point, they just kind of stopped with the dwellings when there was nothing that like wasn't a dwelling anymore. Because there's definitely parts of town where the town extended beyond what is mapped. I just don't know enough about the Sanborn maps and how they were like making those decisions. But yeah, it certainly wasn't like the community in total. So I know there have been some, like there's at least one, I think there's a Black church in Maryville that I've been trying to find with my students, and the map just cuts off one street before where it was, and that church was definitely there. They just stopped doing the map at that point because I think it was just a little too far beyond downtown for them to keep including, which is unfortunate because that is in fact the Black church we don't know the exact location for.
Fascinating.
Okay. Well,
And
that is all from me. And so
thanks
I'll
a
stop
lot
the
for letting
share.
me geek out over this. And now I'm like going to be very distracted from doing some of these things I want to do because I'm very interested in this. Even Scott and I were just working with some teachers last week and we had looked at the Sanborn maps a little bit, but you offered a lot more clarity than what I knew for sure. So thank you so much for doing that. I want to just everybody, can we just take a minute to just thank Dr. Ford for what she gave us today? Thank you so much for that. I do just want to quickly share with you before we depart today our link to our program website. I dropped that in the chat for you. I do want to highlight a couple of things really quick on the site. I am going to share my screen on this one. And when you click on that site, nwmissouri.edu/TPS, when you scroll down, you'll see our program. These are the in-person workshops that we have. We have had some people actually show up from Illinois, believe it or not, and Kansas and Missouri. But if you click on this webinar section here, you may have seen this when you first registered, but here's where we have the 5 webinars that we have upcoming. The first 4 have been scheduled. So our next one that is coming up is webinar number 2, Bringing Rural Histories to Life Using Picture Books and Primary Source Investigations, with an elementary teacher out of Olathe, Kansas. It's slated for Monday, March 17th at this same time, 6 p.m. Rachel is an author of a book about making time for social studies, a 4-step approach for unit planning. Currently a 5th grade teacher, has been teaching over 20 years. And when you go to register, you'll see that in this session, she's going to introduce participants to the process of pairing historical sources with informational text, highlighting how various types of primary sources and children's picture books can be combined to engage learners in exploring rural histories and developing their historical thinking. So if you already have something booked for that night, you know you can't be here. If you sign up for that, I'll make sure that you get an email with the link to the session, but also it will provide you the link that you can share with other people to register to attend as well. So if you've got friends who are interested, I know a lot of people say, well, I don't teach elementary school, so how is a children's picture book going to pertain to me? And I will say that I taught high school and I used picture books all the time. It's a great, easy way to teach content, but also have students interrogate the content of those books and also maybe afford some primary source pairings to do a little bit of a deep dive on those topics that are talked about in those picture books. So those are great ways to get students engaged at any grade level, not just elementary. So we hope that you share that widely with your people by directing them to that nwmissouri.edu/TPS link. And we hope to see you around soon. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. This is going to be on our YouTube channel. You can also subscribe to that from that same nwmissouri.edu link. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to any of us. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you next month.